by members of my team. I've got Catherine Walker, Leah Maltby, Jacqueline Wilson, and Catherine and Leah are going to help go through the presentation shortly. We are recording the session, so I need to make you all aware of that. Obviously, we've got people that couldn't join today. So we do want to give people the opportunity to access this once we've finished. So that's why we're recording it. So you'll see the record button just at the top of the screen there. Okay, we're going to run through a presentation, as I say. We'll keep this to the key points about what UK Shared Prosperity Fund is, the criteria, what we need to do as a local authority, what we've done so far, and really importantly, inviting your help and support and input to this whole process. And then there'll be opportunity for you to ask questions that you may have, and we'll try and answer those, and hopefully it'll be a really valuable hour. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Catherine and Leah now to take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. Welcome everybody. I'm going to turn my camera off so that you can focus on the slides. Thanks, Leah. Next slide, please. So good afternoon. We're here to talk you through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and the approach that we're taking and opportunity for you to ask lots of questions. So if you have got questions, use the chat function and we'll hopefully get to them all towards the end. UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a domestic funding programme that effectively replaces the EU structural funds, so ERDF and the like. And it's a 3-year programme initially of capital and revenue allocation. It, of course, is directly linked to the government's levelling up agenda. For Cheshire West and Chester, we have been allocated a maximum amount of 12.6 million. That is 12.6 million over the 3-year period starting in this current financial year. And it also includes 1.5 million, which is ring-fenced for the government's adult numeracy programme, Multiply. We'll talk through the allocations in a slide or two. The allocation, we talk about it as being a maximum allocation because it's an amount that has been effectively ring-fenced for us, but will only be made upon receipt of an investment plan that is approved. Those investment plans have to be submitted, one for Multiply and one for core UK Shared Prosperity. Of course, they need to talk to each other and they need to support each other, but they do run at different timelines. So Multiply is the 30th of June, and for the core UKSPF, it's no later than the 1st of August. There are 3 main pillars within the core UKSPF activity or objectives. They are around community and place, supporting local business, and people and skills, although that particular strand doesn't actually come online until the 3rd year of the programme, which is 24-25 financial year. So we recognise that the funding that's been allocated to us as a local authority area is significantly less than the previous EU monies. However, it does give us much more flexibility. There are less restrictions on who we can support with that, and the type of projects can be very much linked to what we need, and absolutely should be linked to what we need to achieve as a borough. Although it's a 3-year allocation at this stage, we are keen to develop a pipeline of projects that perhaps run on for sort of years 4 to 7 onwards where possible, so that we can see the long-term aims and impacts of what we would be trying to achieve. And we'll talk you through the investment plan in a little bit more detail as we go through. Next slide, please, Leah. So the indicative threshold values that I mentioned, 12.642 over the 3-year period. And what we do know is that it's largely a revenue funding programme actually, and the capital elements of it are much smaller. Although within the prospectus it talks about capital allocations being a minimum, we have had clarification that that's actually the target as well. So they would not expect to be seeing capital investments much greater than about this amount, which is 10, 20 and 30% as we move through the years. What we don't have is any direct guidance on the split across the three areas. So that's for us to determine where our priorities lie around those three pillars that I mentioned as well. And as you can see, it's backloaded. So this year, it's not a huge amount. It ramps up a little bit next year, but it primarily comes online in 24-25, and that's when the people and skills component comes through as well, as I mentioned earlier. So there isn't an expectation within the programme at all that there is match funding requirements, although we would deem that as advantageous and it would allow us to leverage much greater return from UK shared prosperity funding. So what we would ask partners to look at is there any contribution that they can make, although as I say, it's not mandatory at all. There is a component within there that I mentioned, which is just short of 1.5 million, and that is ring fenced for multiply activity. In terms of the programme for this, I should point out that whilst the funding comes through at the beginning of each financial year, the funding for this year won't come through until the approval of the 3-year investment plan. And it needs to be clearly linked to outcomes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. And therefore, there is a risk of clawback if outcomes aren't achieved in any one financial year. So they're just some of the financial implications around it. Next slide, thanks, Leah. So what are the objectives for UK shared prosperity? So I mentioned communities in place is the first one, and that's really around things like culture, regeneration, building neighbourhoods and communities, building in resilience and also ensuring that they are safe places, that they are places where people want to engage and participate and learn and be generally sound locations that are animated, that have culture running through them, that support physical and mental well-being as well. So really quite a broad area under communities in place. There are a list of interventions, and you can see the link there, and we'll put the link in the chat as well. But there are a list of interventions in terms of the kinds of things that they might expect to see. It could include things like delivery and engagement of youth outreach projects, for example, or promoting active use of public spaces, grassroots or locally led music, theatre and cultural activity. We know that this one, because it's so broad, could be applied to a number of different areas. So it's very important for anybody that is thinking about opportunities to consider the evidence and the challenge and the opportunity and the outcomes that could be achieved. Under supporting local business, it's possibly a little more focused, really. That's very much around creating jobs, boosting the business community, so working through things like sector development or cluster development activity, supporting things like open innovation and open networking opportunities. It's about building investments into industry so that we can grow the value, the density, the jobs within those particular industries as well. It's about bringing the business community together, either within particular sectors or more generally as a whole. And it's about us looking at programs that can really help those organisations to share that knowledge, share expertise, possibly even share resources, and think very differently about what our business support landscape looks like, so that we can stimulate innovation, so that we can stimulate growth, importantly, so that the job opportunities are at all spectrums, so entry level right the way through, and that some of that opportunity is locally led, so that we are ensuring that we're investing in people locally so that they can benefit from those opportunities as well. Typical projects could include things like improvements to local markets, wraparound support for SMEs or high growth businesses, training and development, sector development activity, cluster network establishment. So there's a broad range of things that could be covered under supporting local business. Under the third pillar is people and skills, and this is very much, it's at the heart of what we need to do in Cheshire West. But as I said earlier, it doesn't come online until year 3. That said, there are potential opportunities to consider within the other 2 themes, actually how some of that people and skills development could be delivered earlier on, so that it's either laying the foundations for year 3 activity, or is supporting the growth of sectors. So there are opportunities there. The people and skills strand is very much about boosting core skills, supporting adults to progress in work. So that workforce development activity is hugely important. There is opportunity, obviously, to target adults with no or low qualification and skills levels, but also about upskilling the workforce as well, and ensuring that we build in resilience through our activity. We would expect it to see or to support reducing levels of economic inactivity, and those initiatives can be bespoke, intensive support, employment support, working with our big employers or some of our anchor institutions, working with our learning providers to really do something that is very specific and rooted in the needs of our borough. In terms of the type of projects, it could be personalised intensive support for people looking to get into work, training delivered in alternative settings. For example, the boot camp programme is just about up and running, but there could be opportunities for academy-based work programmes that are already built into working organisations, not just for their own employees, but as a centre of excellence to support broader growth of the sector, for example. It could include things like activities to support residents' confidence building and motivation to get into work or to develop in work, importantly. And of course, the whole green skills agenda, particularly in our borough, is something of huge importance. So access and ensuring that we've got the right strong talent pipeline coming through to support that transition is a big opportunity for us. On the multiply side of things, this is the ring-fenced funding, and this is a government programme which is about adult numeracy. It's for adults aged 19 plus without a grade 4 or C qualification. Now, that can be quite broad, actually, and it could apply to people that are already in work as well as those that are out of work. It lends itself to things like supporting people that may be out of work, particularly with the cost of living crisis, to manage their household or business finances, for example, a lot more closely, and to really trying to get a handle on those. But it is also a strand where we recognise that the attractions of maths courses might not necessarily be the best route. So aligning that to other learning potentially is an option. It will be supported by national activity as well. That we know that there is a new online platform being built and personal tutoring. And for this, we're also looking at how we can build capacity, so ensuring that we've got maths tutors in place to be able to support this learning, and also how we can penetrate much deeper into different communities. as I mentioned, a maths course isn't usually that attractive to people. So if we can work with a lot of smaller organisations, maybe they're charities or just community-based organisations, then we're looking at ways in which we can support them without them having to go through a formal procurement process to be commissioned for some of this work, so that we can deliver this activity in a much more innovative and grassroots way to reach the communities that could benefit. Next slide, please, Leah. So the investment plans that I mentioned are running at different timelines. So the multiply investment plan I mentioned 30th of June, and the core plan 1st of August, absolute deadline. They are a little bit different. I mentioned that they're a lot more flexible in terms of the outcomes and the interventions we can use, very different to the European funds. But I also mentioned that it's significantly less, and therefore it's worth us pointing out at this stage that we know we're going to have a lot of interest for UKSPF, and we're not going to be in a position to support 100% of projects to progress. As a result, the evidence base is something that we really must try and to instill in anybody that's sort of thinking about developing a project or contributing to a project that might come forward. The evidence base is that golden thread, really. So we need to be really clear as to what the challenge and opportunity is that exists. And we have to be able to clearly evidence that that is a challenge or an opportunity. And we need to be really clear on the end outcome as well that we would want to achieve. And once we've got those two components, it's then about developing that solution and that can have the greatest impact at a borough-wide level. We do know that the investment plans are the start of the conversation, though, as well. So we don't have to have everything absolutely bottomed out. We need to be very clear in terms of what our challenges and opportunities are. We know what we need. We know that we need to be able to state what we want to achieve. But the actual detail of projects can be developed after the plans have been submitted. So it's not a cut-off and that's it. We also know that there will be some degree of opportunity, a little bit of wriggle room, not a huge amount at this stage, we don't think, but there will be some opportunity to develop and change the plan a little bit as we move through, so long as those outcomes largely remain the same, because it also recognises that things change within the environment and we need to be able to be quite agile and responsive to that as well. Next slide, please, Leah. So what's our role as a local authority? We need to be able to develop and to be able to demonstrate actually that we've undertaken extensive stakeholder engagement. So we've started that process, and today is very much part of that process as well. The engagement that they would like us to see as part of the plan is actually quite broad, and it includes a really wide range of organisations, everything from employer bodies such as the Chamber and FSB and organisations like that, through to businesses directly, large SMEs, some of those micro businesses. Our strategic bodies in the organisation, in the sub-region, such as the LEP. Environmental and rural organisations, so really recognising that's it's a big part of our economy in Cheshire West, so making sure that they're completely integrated. Public health and crime, so people like the Police and Crime Commissioner, we would want to try and get involved in this process. Community, voluntary and faith groups, of course. Education and skills providers, employment support services, so everybody that's sort of involved in the whole ecosystem around those three pillars, really, and we need to try and reach if at all possible. And MPs as well. So a lot of government funding is routing the support for plans through MPs. This is no different. We have engaged our MPs already, so we've already had introductory meetings with them, and we have that set in place as well moving forward, so that they can feel that they are comfortable with the plan for this area as well. Next slide, please, Leah. We also will have a role around governance. We have an internal role given a local authority in terms of our own transparency and making sure that the decisions that are taken and the approach to how we manage the fund moving forward is clearly transparent and is robust and is secure, in the broadest sense, really. We will be having to take the investment plans through cabinet approvals as well. So that's our internal bit. Externally, and as part of the investment plan, we are also required to set up a local partnership group. Now, there was no real guidance in terms of what that group needed to look like, and where there was one that was already existing, we were encouraged to be able to use that. Now, we were fortunate in the borough because we'd recently, probably 6 or 9 months ago, had set up an anchor institution network. The Anchor Institution Network comprised organisations that are absolutely rooted in our economy, that were really invested in social value, that collectively employed a lot of people, had really decent procurement power, and had a lot of soft power as well because they weren't going anywhere. That included people like the police and the fire service, the NHS, the universities, the chamber, etc. So we have allocated that, and they've agreed to be the local partnership group, and we will have a few meetings of that local partnership group because they will be the organisation that needs to be able to sort of rubber stamp and say yes. They'll check and challenge, and they will effectively say yes, this is the plan that is going to deliver the best benefit for our region. We recognise that there was a few gaps on there, though, that didn't necessarily meet all of the criteria, so we've sought to fill those gaps, and we've requested others to join, so we've sent invitations out for others to join, so it is truly representative, and those organisations on that local partnership group will be tasked with communicating out as well. So hopefully, if you don't hear from us directly, you may well hear from somebody that's on the local partnership group as we go through the process. We're also considering our alignment with other local authorities and the neighbouring authorities, and again, that is something that has been encouraged through the guidance. So where there's advantage and opportunity in working at a bigger geography, we're encouraged to look at that. So in our instance, that includes Cheshire East and Warrington at a sub-regional level. It also involves us looking at the Mersey Alliance, which we're a partner of long standing. So that includes Wrexham and Flintshire and the Liverpool City region. And of course, we'd want to explore and monitor what's going on in the likes of Shropshire and Manchester as well, just so that we can ensure that we're learning from best practice necessarily and leveraging opportunity where it exists. The final role, I'm sure it won't be the final one as things roll out, but the final thing that we understand at the moment is about managing that fund. So we will have to have systems in place if we're running grant programmes, for example, but to also not just to allocate the funding, but to monitor and evaluate the impact of those programmes, and working with delivery organisations to be able to support that so that we can report back on a regular basis. Next slide, please, Leah. So in terms of what we've done to date, we've been working internally to have a look at what the priorities are and what some of the evidence is telling us at a local level in terms of where the opportunity to have the greatest impact lies. We've also been reviewing the current European funded programmes, and within that we're looking at those that are working well, components of them or all of them that aren't necessarily working well and that might not want to continue, and those that are particularly some of the skills funding that might come to an end and would put organisations at risk. So we're doing a lot of that scoping, but if you're aware of any of those programmes and want to draw our attention to it, or aware of any of those skills programmes that by finishing and there being a funding gap would put your organisation or an organisation that you're aware of at risk of failure, then please do flag that to us as well. We're currently considering as well how the funding can be allocated. So there are a number of different options. It can be delivered in-house, it can be commissioned, procured, or we can run grant programmes. We're probably looking to do a mix of those across the patch, really. We've developed a website page so that you can keep up to date on where things are. So this recording, we expect to go onto that website, and we'll just keep that updated so that you can understand exactly the next steps, the timelines, and some of those projects that are starting to emerge as well. Next slide, please, Leah, and I think it's the final slide. So our ask of you is to consider the information, have a read really of the prospectus, because it's really very detailed. Have a read of the interventions that we mentioned, and then have a think about actually what your contribution could be, and if you're aware of any projects, or if you have an idea for a project that will meet the fund objectives, speak to either the relevant council team. So if it's around people, you might want to engage sort of our social care teams, for example, or our health and wellbeing team, or of course you can come to us as well. We have an email address set up, so you can drop us a note there, and we can answer any questions as well. But it's really about, we know that there's going to be a lot of project ideas coming forward, so we would ask you initially just to read that information and just make sure that it meets the objectives and ultimately supports more than one organisation, so it supports the wider borough and has the greatest possible impact, because that's the way that the money can be of most advantage really to our borough. So that's it from me. I think we're open to ask any questions now, and between Leah, myself and Gemma, we will we'll hopefully answer those questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. And thanks, Leah, for guiding the slides as well. So there's been quite a few questions in the chat, so we'll and there's some themes that we can pick out there, so we'll deal with those first, and then but please put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question as well. We've got about half an hour, so hopefully we can get through quite a few questions in that time. So Catherine and Leah, there was a question about, is financial resilience or literacy linked with Multiply? And that was from Vicky Ayton.
Sorry, could you repeat that one, Gemma?
Yeah, so the question is to do with Multiply, and Vicky's asking, is financial resilience or literacy linked with Multiply?
Do you want to answer that one, Leah?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, financial literacy definitely can be part of the Multiply strand. So I think it's anything that, you know, maths has that underpinning element to it, can be very much part of that scope, because as Catherine mentioned, we haven't got a huge numbers of people knocking on doors wanting to do a maths course. It can be embedded in a range of things, and I think financial literacy absolutely can be part of that offer.
Okay, hopefully that answers your question, Vicky. So there was quite a few questions, particularly from Gareth and Andrew, Darren. So Gareth, I think your questions are really relating to the local sort of partnership approach, and particularly about localities. So you've asked what's the sort of what are local partnerships are being formed. I think we've covered the local partnership group. There's some questions a bit further on about West Cheshire Anchor Network, which we can pick up as well. So Gareth's asking why roundtables for objectives and not localities, and Andrew added that the locality approach responds to the needs and assets within the community, and roundtables he feels could encourage silo thinking.
Okay, so I guess we've been led a little bit by time as well, because obviously time's not on our side for a lot of this. So where we'd started from was trying to think of the bigger picture really, which is why we'd gone down the themes rather than localities, because we know that we will need to look at the evidence, and so that projects will need to be directed where they can to where we can have the greatest impact at a local level, particularly where there's a distinct or acute need within a particular area. But ultimately the round tables allowing us to get that bigger picture view initially as to what some of those projects might be, and then allowing us to sort of join the dots. So we won't be seeing them in isolation. There are some organisations that are attending all 3 round tables, for example, or all 4 round tables actually, including Multiply. But there are the opportunity, I think, which we haven't necessarily had with previous funding, particularly European funding, and when we were doing the CRF bids, was that we have the opportunity here to really join the dots and not just think at a local individual project level. So that's where we'd come from on the basis of doing that around the themes for interventions, which is obviously what we need to be able to evidence within the investment plan.
Is it fair to add, Catherine, that, you know, because this is very much obviously being delivered through local authorities though, and the evidence-based need, actually we can be a lot more granular in terms of that evidence? So, you know, one of our challenges in Cheshire West is obviously it's looked at as a borough, but actually we can look at ward level information and locality information, can't we, to help inform those priorities and those sort of cross-cutting interventions?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably coming from a place of not wanting to, we probably don't want sort of 1,000 little projects for areas, and actually some of that will then come through if we can start with the project and then direct where that can have the best impact. It possibly gives us the opportunity not just to think of lots of little projects that will have, you know, some impact locally, but that can be leveraged and that can really be rolled out across the borough.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers those questions. Then there was some questions about the West Cheshire Anchor Network. Gareth asked, is it comprehensive and balanced? I mean, I'm involved as well, and I would say it's very, you know, it's very much a borough-wide group. There's currently about 15 organisations, but we've just added to that, as Catherine said, recognising some of those gaps. I think there's a concern that maybe it's employment and skills heavy, and I would say it's not. I think it has got really broad sectors on there, so health, all the housing associations are on there, and that's another question in the chat about housing associations being involved. All of our housing associations operating in the borough, as far as I'm aware, are involved in the Anchor Network, Catherine, aren't they? As well as the university, the colleges. So I don't know whether you want to add anything else about the Anchor Network.
Yeah, I mean it's exactly that really. We can share who they are, but we recognise that there were a number of gaps, but the anchors that are there aren't necessarily thinking just about employment. In fact, the reason why they came together and as we brought them together as an anchor network was very much around the social value and the impact on people, actually, rather than just sort of having a very business and a strict economy focus. So Gemma mentioned some of those organisations, but it also includes the NHS. It includes the Countess of Chester Hospital, Cheshire West Voluntary Action, DWP have been invited to join that group, West Cheshire Interfaith Group. So it is very, very broad without it just being everybody, but hopefully we feel is very balanced and does reflect the entirety of the different component parts of the economy.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catherine. There's some other questions in the chat, which I know Leah's picking up as well. So we'll perhaps come back to some of those we haven't answered. But I'm conscious to get to people that have also got their hands up. So I've got John Hesselwood first. Hi, John.
Hi, Gemma. Thanks for that. Firstly, I wanted to say a bit of a well done to Cheshire West, because the government hasn't given you or any local authority enough time at all to sort this out, and you're actually a little bit ahead of the curve compared to some areas that we're working with at the moment. So well done for that. We run a community buildings network, so we've started a process already to gather information. We've actually got 15 community venues in Cheshire West alone to gather information on projects that they are planning or considering delivering that meet the interventions and the priorities. Because obviously things have changed a lot from the sort of ESF days, so the sort of community sector is going to be quite key in this. And just another comment on that. Obviously, this fund has come through and changed the shift from sort of economic development to a more sort of community development approach. at the back end of a decade of austerity when our sort of community sector has been, you know, suffered from that. So it's just a plea really for the authority to work readily with the sector, which it sounds like you are striving to do, because I think we're at a stage in our sector where it needs to be built up again to achieve a lot of these outcomes. The other point I was going to make, and I don't know if you've sort of contacted this sector directly, but the parish council network, I sit on the Cheshire Association board, and I can help with that, and I'm sure you may have been in touch with Jackie Weaver already, but it was just to make sure that you sort of don't miss out on that sector as well. And the other final bit is just, you know, you put the business support email up there. There's other projects that we're involved with, things like community-led housing and development, and it's just clarity on which route into this bid the various components go in. So is that email the best route to sort of figure out which place we go to?
Yeah, it's a dumping ground for inquiries basically. So although it's you know, the email is business support, it's just you know, that we know that that's monitored and can be passed through. But ultimately, what we're encouraging people to do is to start thinking about those projects, and we as a sort of a team behind the scenes working with the various groups that are established, are then looking to sort of pull all that together and determine where it best fits. Because I think it's probably fair to say that there will be some projects that come in that could fit under multiple. So actually, you know, the trick for us there will be to be able to talk to the organisations that are proposing that and really look at, well, how could it add to multiply and how could it add to this? So really doing a lot of that work behind to sort of really connect and make sure that you know, a project comes in, it's a great idea. There might be other projects that are a little bit linked or a little bit similar, and that's when we want to really try and bring those conversations together, so that we can form much bigger, better, stronger projects.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, John, and thanks for your feedback. And in terms of town and parish councils, I know that is a group we're also engaging with. I actually went to the Connect event last week to talk about something else, but I know it's a really useful forum, and we've got a newsletter that goes out, haven't we, that can make sure that we pick it up in there as well if we haven't already. So thank you for that. Okay, next is Neil Clatworthy. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Gemma. Thank you for inviting me. Just a couple of questions, really. Obviously, the investment plan goes in August. How quickly are you thinking government to turn that round? Because in Community Renewal Fund and others, there's a long delay, and you've got targets for this year to spend. How flexible is that first year rollover, or is it a case of spend it or lose it?
Do you want me to answer that one? Yeah. So it is use it or lose it. So we're told there is no flexibility in terms of rollover, and unless there's a if it's a programme that's sort of a 3-year programme that is being proposed, and you can clearly evidence as to why outcomes haven't been achievable, for example, there may be a degree of flexibility within that one. We're told that the conversations, once the investment plan is submitted no later than the 1st of August, that August and September will be refining, coming back with questions, developing it out further. So that's where the bulk of conversation will happen, August and September, with a view to investment plans being finalised very late September, early October. Now, local authorities can deliver at risk, but obviously that's probably not something that we would necessarily want to do. So it is going to effectively be sort of a 6-month programme for this year. So outputs will be key.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Neil, for that question. So I'm coming now to Gareth. Gareth, I'm sorry, I wasn't going to try and pronounce your surname because I'll probably get it wrong.
So do I, and I would have happily kept putting my hand down till I was last on the list, because I have asked lots of questions in the chat. So my starting point was the fact that the funding allocation QAC receives is 70% based on population, and 30% weighted based on need. So my initial question, which I think is most crucial to communities, is will the investment plan follow the same path so that every single community across Cheshire West benefits from this funding? My concerns around the Anchor Institution Network is that lots of the organisations on there do very, very little in our community. They don't engage with our community very much at all. So if it's left to those organisations, the investment will follow the same ESF route that all the investment has for years. And this isn't European Social Fund money. This isn't European funding. The money replaces European funding, but it isn't European funding. It has a different focus.
Okay. Shall I sort of kick off with that one? So I mean, I think it's important to clarify the role of the local partnership group, I think, and the role of the Anchor network, because they are effectively going to have an oversight role of our investment plan. So one of the reasons why we put this webinar on today was to start to get the input from different organisations, and as many as possible. And as I say, I think we had 85 people registered today, which is brilliant. And it's really nice in the chat to see people connecting with each other as well. And I think that's one of the things that we're really keen to see through this. You know, we're not kidding ourselves that this money has got to go as far as possible. And that's going to be a challenge. Particularly in the themes like community and place, which is very broad, as Catherine said. You know, you've probably looked at it as well. You know, there's a whole plethora of stuff within there. So we are going to have our work cut out to really sort of hone in on, okay, so what are the interventions that are going to have the biggest impact for the most people in the borough? But that, you know, that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. So sessions like this, the wider sort of roundtable discussions, the networks that we want to link in, and the Anchor network institutions have a real role to play in that as well in terms of their wider networks. But we're not putting everything on that, you know, on just that one group. That's, you know, I say that's what the basis of today is, to start to have those conversations early. We had a local member session as well a couple of days ago, where we invited all of our elected members onto a similar session, because, you know, really keen to get local member engagement in this as well. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance about our approach, and that we're trying to sort of engage with as many people as we can, but also we've got to be clear that we are going to have to hone in on the things that are going to have the biggest impact and that are evidence based. Catherine, do you want to add to that at all, or Leah?
I don't think so from my perspective now. You know, we've seen other places that have sort of launched EOIs, so, you know, everybody can just sort of throw in their expressions of interest, and we actively determined that probably wasn't the right route, just because you know, the funding isn't going to go far. So it does need to be biggest impact rather than sort of, you know, slicing the cake and ensuring everybody gets a share, because unfortunately then we'll end up in a similar way to ERDF, where we had lots and lots of different projects running and never the twain shall meet across those projects. And I guess I would hope that we would all agree that probably isn't what we want to achieve.
Can I
I will shut up now, but I agree. I absolutely agree with what you've just said, Catherine, except for the fact that there are communities that didn't benefit at all from any European funding and other communities that benefited a lot. And that's the distinction that I'm more concerned about, to be honest.
Can I just add to something? I think that's one of the conversations I've had with Rachel Foster, who is one of our directors within our sort of place, in the fact that actually some areas of activity have had a lot of money going in over the various years and other areas don't. And so actually when we get to having a look at some of the projects, I think that is going to be one of the considerations that we're going to throw into the mix as well. And I think Catherine's right. We want to have some projects that have real big impact, because we've got to kind of manage those as well. But I think we do want to keep that conversation about how we can get some of those smaller grants out to communities that may not have huge impacts, but actually for that community makes a bigger difference. So it's about how we try and do that in a sensible way.
Great, thanks, Leah. And as if by magic, Rachel is on the call. Rachel, do you want to come in?
Yes, sorry, I had a clash. I've not been able to join all, but I think I've caught most of it. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reassure Gareth and others, I think there's an opportunity with the ways we can allocate this funding further down the line around some of that grant or project-based work. So I think it's about having those key themes right across the areas and those key outcomes we want to achieve, but looking at how we can use the different mechanisms to deliver differently in different areas. So I think we started to develop some key themes, and I think the roundtables will help shape that. But I think if we consider this stage in the investment plan kind of really capturing the intent and what outcomes we can deliver, I think then further down the line we can hone some of that in some of those areas that have not previously benefited. So a lot of work to do around it, but I take the point, Gareth. I think we do need to reflect that in how we're assessing projects going forward. But I think we just need to think creatively and cleverly around how we look at the delivery phases and not tie ourselves in not at this high level investment plan stage.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. Just there's a question in the chat about the process, so the application sort of process, and also sort of the investment plan process. So is it worth just saying a little bit more about how that's going to work in terms of, because effectively there isn't going to be a central government application process, is there? It is effectively the investment plan.
Yeah, absolutely, which is effectively that's why we'd plan to do sort of the round tables and the ongoing engagement, really, so that we can get to the broad level outcomes that need to be achieved and a real clear indication of what the challenges and opportunities are, and then do a lot of the legwork in terms of bringing people together to be able to really help to refine what those projects are. In terms of the delivery mechanisms, as we've said before, we've got a little bit of time. We need to be able to indicate to a degree what we'd like to do or what we're considering, but we have got a little bit more time to be able to focus on that. There won't be an application process initially as we're developing the investment plan, but depending on what delivery mechanisms we choose. So if we run sort of, we'll use an example for Multiply. So one of the things that we were looking at was that Multiply could, it could be really delivered really quite well by using community-based organisations or those community centres that were referenced before, and some of the faith groups, for example, because they will reach a completely different audience than what our standard activity might be able to do. So if we run that, and some of those organisations are that small that they wouldn't bother going through procurement processes because the return isn't great enough. So one thing that we're wanting to actively do are rounds of grants and competitions, if you like, similar to to other funding programmes that you might see, where it's clear in terms of what the theme is, and then they'll be invited to sort of put their application in as part of that process. So that's probably that's what we're thinking at the moment, rather than inviting applications at this stage, because it doesn't it's not required for the early part of the investment plan.
Great, thanks, Catherine. I'll go back to hands now. There was one up from Chester Visual Arts, but I think they might have just dropped off the call because they've disappeared. So if they come back on. Oh, yeah,
hi, Gemma.
You are there.
Still here. We're deciding whether to ask Catherine. You sort of addressed it in the your last comment. The question is, who might be on these roundtables representing the arts, and how does that voice in debate or conversation occur for the arts, since that's one of the key categories for submission?
Leah, do you want to answer that one, or Rachel? Because I know culture and the arts is very much sort of a golden thread throughout.
Yes.
I think at the moment, because it's probably the most open of sort of roundtables that we're trying to pull together, we're still pulling key stakeholders together in that respect. So, if you think that yourself or others should be part of that discussion, then just drop us a note in the chat, and that would be great.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to support that, Leah, we've got our kind of usual engagement channels and our groups and partners and delivery partners across the borough who we're engaging with through Carmel and Emma. So yeah, you will all, I'm sure everyone on this call has looked a quick look through the list, but yeah, that yourselves and others will absolutely be included, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to come to Gary next, and then John will come back to you because you asked a question earlier. So I'm going to just come to Gary first. That's okay?
Yeah.
Hi,
everybody.
Gary.
Yeah, Gary Cliff, Chief Executive of Cheshire West Voluntary Action. So I'm the one that's been putting a few comments in the chat. Just to say, yes, get in touch, please. We're all getting collaborations together. And I was just going to say that Radiate Arts and ourselves, together with about another 20 organisations in the arts, got together recently to put a bid into another volunteer fund or whatever it was called. So yeah, that grouping and collaboration is already sort of up and running. So anybody who wants to, I'm sure we're going to talk about that and whether or not that we can resurrect that, because it was a great project. So yeah, if anybody wants to be talking about any projects that they think, whether from a voluntary community and faith sector, then please do get involved. And as Lee has already said on this in the chat, there's a meeting that we're pulling together for the voluntary community faith sector. I think it's the 10th of June, isn't it, Leah? I think. I keep saying it is, but so I hope it is. So yeah, and the idea behind that is to have this same conversation really, but do it in the context of what can we do as communities. We've got a sector leadership group in CWVA, and that's already had a lot of conversations going on about what we could do and what can we do. So yeah, hopefully we're going to be fully engaged with this process. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes,
thanks,
Gary. It's 9:30 to 11. I think we're planning to do a similar session for the voluntary sector on Friday the 10th of June.
Right.
So if anyone wants to come along to that, can they be added to that invitation? Is that just, who do they need to contact?
I suspect we'll be doing it collaboratively. So yes, if you give us the date, we'll send it out to all our members. And if there are other people that aren't members that want to come along, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So if you can just provide that link to somebody else, Leah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Brilliant. So if we pick that up through our email then.
Yeah.
Our email address. Okay, brilliant. If anyone wants to be added to that, if you could do that and contact that email address. Thanks, Gary.
Could I just add, Gemma, as well? I mean, we are the conduit for the investment plan, but we're not the only ones that you can have conversations with. So I would encourage you within your own networks to be using the next week or two or three to be able to to pull your own conversations together and really start thinking collectively about how projects could be developed and forging your own links, because it's a huge task that we've got within a certain length of time, and we're bound to miss somebody, but you might not. So do have your own conversations as well. That's really just as important as part of the process.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, definitely. Okay, John, to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. It was just a sort of think out loud strategic point, really, that the objectives of this programme read quite like a mass regeneration programme, really, and it's quite good to see that the government's finally talking about communities again in this sense. I mean, the QAC officers on the call probably know, I mean, there's been millions poured into regeneration over recent years, if not billions, and there's a lot of evidence now to show that where communities aren't involved in those decisions and decision making, they just don't work, they don't get buy-in. So it was just a kind of point and a plea to Cheshire West to make sure that thread runs through this, that this is an opportunity and that there are mechanisms to involve residents and communities and things like that. I know we're talking a lot about the sector, and that our voluntary sector will be key to that, but it's just to make sure that it's rooted on the ground and that as many people can be involved with those key decisions as possible, really. I just wanted to make that point.
No, thanks, John. And organisations like yours and a number of us on the call, are really important as part of that. And I think Catherine's point about if there are other networks and organisations that you're aware of, we're relying on you as well to help us sort of understand that and for you to bring them in as well. I think given how much we've got to do on this, we're only going to achieve this and the best possible investment plan we can for Cheshire West if we all work together. So I think your thoughts and you'll have thoughts after today as well, I'm sure. We'll be sending the slides around and we'll be making the recording available, so you'll have opportunity to, if you wanted to, watch it back again, or certainly sort of pick the other things up from the slides that you might want to reflect on. So again, we'd encourage you to then get in touch via that email address with anything you want to sort of add after today, really. Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Is there anything else anyone is burning to ask while we've got a couple of minutes left? as I say, we'll pick up anything we've perhaps missed in the chat. Leah, we could perhaps pick that up afterwards, can't we, just to make sure we've got all of those questions covered off.
I think we've covered most of them, Gemma.
You've been doing a great job of keeping track.
I couldn't do it
whizzing
and show
down my
the slides
screen
at the same time, unfortunately, but I've also added in the document which has got the outputs and outcomes, which is really helpful because it's such an open fund. Sometimes it's quite difficult to distill what that actually means, and it gives some really good sort of project ideas and suggestions that could feature under all of those objectives and strands. So it's a useful document just to have a quick look at if you're shaping thoughts and ideas.
No, that's great. We'll send any of the other resources out as well as part of the slide pack, but I think most links are in there. Okay, so final question is Keith Roper, who you've just put your hand up. So Keith, do you want to ask the final question?
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. It was touched on earlier, and I can see that Leah's actually picked this up in an email elsewhere. And my point is around a bit of the cliff edge between ESF funds on skills and people sort of dropping off and the new funds coming on board at a later date. So I'm aware the local authority does have some potential discretion to keep voluntary sector projects going if they wish to. So I've seen an email that Leah sent elsewhere, and I might pick that up separately with you if that's all right then, Leah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So it's around the loss of the skills of a team of people before the new funding comes on stream, and whether or not anything can be done to keep that ticking over in the meantime. So I'll pick that up with Leah. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, great. Thanks, Keith. Yeah, that's been something we've been looking at as well. Okay, well, we'll draw it to a close then, because it is just about 3 o'clock. We said we'd finish by 3. Can I thank Catherine and Leah and Jacqueline for organising this and delivering the presentation and helping with all the questions. We will be sending the slides out to you all after today, and obviously keeping an eye on air. On all the information on our website as well. Thank you to everybody that's participated and everyone that's come along this afternoon. Really appreciate your time and you taking the time out to come along and get involved and ask you questions. And hopefully you found it really useful and you know a bit more about UKSPF as a result of this session. So thanks all, and take care. Bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.